They sold you self-love. They bought themselves Ozempic. Here's every celebrity who changed their body while pretending they didn't, and the ones who were actually honest about it. 1. Oprah Winfrey. The institutional confession. Oprah Winfrey confirmed GLP-1 medication use in December 2023 after months of public speculation, bringing to the disclosure 30 years of documented public history with weight cycling that her audience had watched in real time. She stated that the medication had changed how she understood people who were thin, that she had attributed their leanness to willpower and discipline, and that the medication revealed to her that the appetite she had experienced as a personal failing had a physiological basis. In December 2025, on her 70th birthday, she stopped taking the injections cold turkey to test whether she could maintain the results without the medication. She regained 20 pounds. She started again. She stated that continuing the medication was likely to be a permanent commitment rather than a defined course of treatment, a conclusion she arrived at through direct personal experience, not prior expectation. 2. Kelly Clarkson. The correction. Kelly Clarkson confirmed using a medically prescribed weight loss medication and simultaneously corrected the public assumption about which one. It was not Ozempic. She has a diagnosed thyroid condition. Her doctor monitored her blood work for 2 years before she agreed to begin treatment, and her hesitation was connected directly to that diagnosis. I'm afraid of it. I already have thyroid problems. The medication she was prescribed was chosen for her specific clinical situation, and the difference between that and what the public had assumed was not cosmetic, but medically meaningful. She did not accept the simplified narrative that would have been easier to let stand. That refusal produced a disclosure less dramatic than a confirmation would have been, and more accurate than the speculation it replaced. 3. Lizzo. The Pragmatic account. Lizzo confirmed Ozempic use in June 2025 on the Just Trish podcast without a medical backstory, without journey language, and without extended justification. Her description of how the medication functions was stated in plain terms. Ozempic works because you eat less food. It makes you feel full. She added that if a person could produce the same caloric result through willpower alone, the outcome would be identical. She did not position people who needed pharmaceutical assistance on a lower tier than people who could manage without it, and she did not perform ambivalence about the choice. 4. James Corden. The Honest Reckoning. James Corden confirmed in September 2024 on his This Life of Mine podcast that he had tried Ozempic and that it had not produced the results he needed, not because of intolerable side effects, but because the medication reduces appetite, and his relationship with food had nothing to do with appetite. I realized, oh no, nothing about my eating has anything to do with being hungry. The mechanism the medication operates through did not address the actual source of his behavior. He stated this plainly, without directing criticism at the medication and without extended performance of self-awareness. He tried it, identified why it was insufficient for his specific situation, and stopped. 5. Billie Jean King. Clinical precision at 80. Billie Jean King confirmed on the Wiser Than Me podcast with Julia Louis-Dreyfus that she has binge eating disorder, that she has been in therapy for it, and that she tells herself every morning she has an eating disorder. Her doctor recommended a GLP-1 medication specifically for its potential effect on the compulsive relationship with food that characterizes binge eating disorder, not primarily for weight management. She was 80 years old at the time of the disclosure. Her stated goal was a gradual process. She was monitoring the medication's effect on her thoughts about food rather than tracking a number on a scale. She named a clinical diagnosis where most people in this conversation offer approximate emotional language. 6. Rebel Wilson. The Body Image Reckoning. Rebel Wilson confirmed in promotion of her 2024 memoir, Rebel, Rising, that she had tried Ozempic during her weight loss journey, described the medication as potentially useful for others, and placed it within a personal history she documented in the book with more candor than most celebrity memoirs sustain about formative relationships with food. She addressed in a Sunday Times interview the specific way the industry had used her body against her professionally, describing it as something that had been laughed at and degraded in terms that made clear the relationship with weight loss was inseparable from the professional context in which her body had always been treated as public property. She declined to perform shame or triumph about the process or about the medication's role in it. 7. Jelly Roll. The 2-week footnote. An editor's note in Jelly Roll's January 2026. Men's health cover story confirmed that he had used a GLP-1 medication at the very beginning of a transformation that ultimately produced a loss of over 250 pounds across roughly 5 years. He used it for 2 weeks and stopped. He expressed no judgment toward people who use the medication for longer or who rely on it as their primary mechanism. He made clear the medication was available to him. He chose not to continue, and he declined to assign moral weight to that choice or to use it as contrast against people who made a different one. The disclosure was almost incidental to an account whose actual subject was the 5 years of work that followed those 2 weeks. 8. Tracy Morgan. The Unguarded Admission. Tracy Morgan confirmed his Ozempic use on the Today Show in 2023 with no contextual framing, no journey narrative, and no careful language positioning the medication as one component among many. That's how this weight got lost. I went and got a prescription, and I got Ozempic, and I ain't letting it go. He subsequently mentioned having regained some weight, which he addressed with the same unguarded quality as the original admission, not in a managed interview designed to reframe the first disclosure, but as a natural continuation of how he had entered the conversation, without architecture, and without apparent concern for how the follow-up reflected on the original decision. 9. John Gosselin. The Enthusiast. John Gosselin confirmed in April 2024 that he had lost 32 pounds in 2 months on semaglutide, taken alongside testosterone therapy, and stated the regret of not starting it 10 years ago. Most celebrities who express enthusiasm about GLP-1 medications still construct careful language around it, individual circumstances, medical guidance, warnings against generalizing from personal experience. Gosselin produced none of that. The medication worked. The outcome was measurable in a specific number of pounds across a specific number of months. His assessment was proportionate to the result. Direct, unhedged, and complete. 10. Chelsea Handler. The accidental patient Chelsea Handler entered the Ozempic conversation through one of the stranger routes on this list. She didn't know she was taking it. On the Call Her Daddy podcast in January 2023, she explained that her anti-aging doctor had simply included semaglutide in a course of treatments without adequately explaining what the compound was. "My anti-aging doctor just hands it out to anybody," she told Alex Cooper. "I didn't even know I was on it. He said, if you want to lose 5 pounds, this stuff will help." It was only when a friend heard her describe the medication and pointed out that semaglutide and Ozempic were the same substance that Handler realized she had been on the medication that the entire country was discussing without anyone having told her directly. Her reaction was immediate and pointed in 2 directions simultaneously. She stopped taking it, described the prescribing practice as irresponsible, and directed that criticism both at the specific doctor who had dispensed the medication without full explanation, and at the broader culture in which Ozempic circulates in certain Hollywood circles, the way vitamin IV drips, anti-aging facials do, as a routine wellness add-on offered by concierge doctors to people who want to lose a few pounds, entirely outside the clinical framework for which the medication was developed. She was uncomfortable with the casual manner of the prescription and said so plainly. The detail at the center of her story, that a doctor had prescribed a medication with significant physiological effects without adequately explaining what it was, raised legitimate questions about prescribing standards that her account brought into public conversation at a relatively early point in the wider celebrity narrative. Most people who entered this conversation did so having made a deliberate, informed choice. Handler stumbled into it, found it concerning, and said so without the protective framing that other celebrities used when discussing the same medication from a position of deliberate use. 11. Drew Barrymore, the industry mirror. Drew Barrymore confirmed trying GLP-1 medication and stopping because her body's physical reaction made the experience unworkable. The nausea was severe enough to prevent normal functioning, a response that in her case, as in Amy Schumer's, meant the medication was simply not compatible with her physiology, regardless of how it functioned for others. What distinguished her account was the structural reflection that followed the personal experience. She addressed a specific discomfort that most celebrity statements in this space avoid: the contradiction of existing inside an industry that profits from the cultural pressure around bodies, while simultaneously stigmatizing the tools people use to respond to that pressure. The internal logic of an environment that rewards weight loss while treating pharmaceutical assistance in achieving it as something requiring shame or concealment. She named that directly, without performing either guilt about having tried the medication or prescriptive warning for other people based on her own experience. Her version of the conversation was less about the personal drama of what happened to her body and more about the system surrounding the experience, which made it one of the more substantive celebrity contributions to a discussion that more typically operates at the level of announcement, denial, or carefully managed confession. She tried it, it didn't work for her. The industry dynamic around all of it struck her as worth naming, and she named it 12. Ricki Lake, The Complete Report. Ricki Lake produced one of the most practically complete first-person accounts of GLP-1 medication use available from any public figure, covering not just the decision and the results, but the specific complications that followed, with a level of detail that the celebrity conversation around these medications almost systematically avoids. She confirmed using Ozempic, described the weight loss as significant, and spoke about the physical changes in terms of improved daily functioning. Then her hair began falling out severely enough to require wigs and to cause genuine distress. She addressed this in multiple interviews with the same directness she brought to the original disclosure. She noted that the connection between rapid weight loss and hair loss is medically documented, regardless of the mechanism involved. A physiological stress response that GLP-1 medications can accelerate, and she discussed it without performing regret about having used the medication or constructing a cautionary narrative for others. The specificity of her account provided the kind of genuinely useful information about what GLP-1 medications can actually produce, including the less photogenic outcomes that the broader celebrity conversation rarely includes. Most public disclosures focus exclusively on the transformation. Ricki Lake's included the aftermath. That made her account substantially more informative and ultimately more honest than accounts from figures with significantly larger platforms who addressed only the parts of the experience that photographed well. 13. John Goodman, the retroactive target. John Goodman occupies a particular position in the Ozempic conversation precisely because his transformation predates the cultural moment of the medication by many years, and the speculation found him anyway. He lost approximately 200 pounds over an extended period, a change so significant it visibly altered his screen presence. The process is thoroughly documented across a timeline spanning more than 15 years. He stopped drinking in 2007, began working with a trainer, restructured his diet, and maintained those changes with consistency across the years that followed. When Ozempic speculation attached itself to his appearance, he responded with mild exasperation. His position was straightforward. The transformation predates the medication by years and reflects sustained lifestyle change, not pharmaceutical assistance. He did not claim to have never encountered GLP-1 medications or to have strong opinions about them as a category. He simply pointed to a timeline that made the prevailing narrative logically insufficient as a complete explanation for something that had been unfolding across more than a decade. His case illustrates a specific problem that emerges. When a medication becomes culturally dominant enough to be applied retroactively, every visible transformation, regardless of how well documented its actual history is, gets filtered through the same pharmaceutical lens. 15 years of documented work on his health did not protect Goodman from speculation that arrived long after the actual changes had occurred. That dynamic tells you more about the cultural moment than about him specifically. 14. Cardi B. No architecture required. Cardi B approached the Ozempic conversation with complete absence of protective architecture. Where most celebrity disclosures arrive layered in careful language about health journeys, medical guidance, and the complexity of personal decisions, she confirmed both Ozempic use and a body contouring procedure in the same breath, with the same matter-of-fact delivery she applies to most personal disclosures, without separating them into a more palatable sequence. She used the medication, it helped with appetite management. She subsequently had a procedure to address loose skin following the weight loss and she stated both things plainly without performing discomfort about the combination. The simultaneous disclosure of pharmaceutical and surgical intervention was unusual in a celebrity conversation that tends to treat those two categories as occupying different moral registers. Medication use increasingly normalized, surgical intervention still handled with more careful public management. By declining to separate them, she implicitly challenged the distinction itself. For an entertainer whose public persona is substantially built on refusing to manage other people's discomfort on her behalf, the consistency of that approach in this specific context was entirely predictable. It was also, in a conversation dominated by evasion and strategic vagueness, genuinely notable. 15. Sharon Osbourne, the complete record. Sharon Osbourne's Ozempic account is worth documenting fully because she provided both the disclosure and the complication. Two parts of the story that most celebrity accounts separate or omit entirely. She confirmed the medication worked quickly and produced significant results. She also confirmed that the speed of the change felt uncomfortable, that the process moved faster than felt physically right, and that she chose to stop rather than continue. "I knew when to stop," she said across multiple interviews. The emphasis on personal threshold over external standard choosing balance rather than a specific number gave her account a practical dimension that straightforward transformation stories rarely include. Her daughter, Kelly Osbourne, subsequently made the family distinction explicit in a way that was unusually precise. "My mom did use Ozempic. I did not." Kelly attributed her own 8-5-pound transformation to eliminating sugar and carbohydrates following a gestational diabetes diagnosis during pregnancy. The fact that she named her mother's confirmed use in the same sentence as her own denial gave both statements a credibility that purely individual claims rarely achieve, demonstrating full awareness of the medication, knowledge of its use within her immediate family, and a deliberate, documented separation of two different realities. Kelly also publicly revised her previously critical position on the medication after encountering someone whose relationship with food and capacity for self-work had genuinely changed through GLP-1 treatment. "I used to be against Ozempic, but I've had a change of heart." The combination of personally denying use while openly revising a critical stance reflects a more nuanced engagement with the subject than most celebrity statements. Manage. 16. Rosie O'Donnell medical context. First, Rosie O'Donnell confirmed Ozempic use within a specific and well-documented clinical context that defined its character from the beginning. She experienced a significant cardiac event in 2012, described her symptoms in a blog post that doctors subsequently credited with raising public awareness about how heart attacks present differently in women, and has remained publicly engaged with her cardiovascular health ever since. Her use of Ozempic was situated directly within that history, a weight management decision made in consultation with doctors monitoring her cardiac risk factors, grounded in clinical reasoning rather than primarily aesthetic motivation. Her framing was characteristically direct. "Whatever choice you make is yours." It's not a secret when you've used something to assist in weight loss, which is entirely acceptable. The statement arrived without apologetic hedging, without extended clinical justification for a choice she considered straightforward, and without the performance of ambivalence that usually surrounds celebrity disclosures in this space. What completed her account was the disclosure of what followed. She stated in subsequent interviews that she had lost more weight than she intended, that the process went further than she had anticipated, and left her at a place she hadn't expected to reach. She was direct about the challenge of stopping the medication and about managing what came afterward. The candor in both directions about using the medication and about the specific ways the outcome had been more complicated than the health intervention it initially appeared to be made her account one of the more practically honest contributions to the broader conversation. What the confirmed accounts share, across all of their differences in tone and outcome, is a refusal to let the public narrative do the work of explanation. The figures who handled this conversation with the most integrity were not necessarily the ones who said the most. They were the ones whose accounts matched the documented record without performing a version of the truth more comfortable than the actual one. In a conversation defined by evasion, that standard is simpler than it sounds and rarer than it should be.